Well, thank you, David. And who'd have thought that Wolverhampton would be the hub of innovation for e-learning? And that was a very interesting presentation and highlighted some of the, again, the international best practices that are out there for us all to leverage as we think about adopting technology in our own systems. I know I'm the guy who's standing in between you and lunch, so I'm going to keep my presentation very short. And the purpose of this presentation is really to share with you some of the excerpts from the report that Pathenon is currently writing and will be submitting very shortly within the next 3 to 4 weeks about our views on technology, specifically within GCC and where it can have the maximum impact. The research that we're undertaking, these slides will be available for you outside in some of the packs, along with some of our other thought leadership. But the research that we're undertaking, again, is, as always, with the work that we do in Pathenon, very data-driven. So a lot of primary research with students, with teachers and parents has been undertaken to bring these perspectives to you. And as I say, we're just going to present some high-level discoveries from the research, which is still underway. So let me start by just briefly introducing Pathenon. And for those of you who don't know us, we're a strategic advisory firm focused on education. We have worked in over 60-plus countries. So all the countries that you see in dark blue on the slide are countries where we have taken on-the-ground research in education. And it's this research that informs a lot of the perspectives and thoughts that we have around education. We advise not only the private sector, but also foundations such as the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but also policymakers, governments, and investors who are increasingly looking at education as an industry to create value. So let's talk, before we talk about our perspectives on what could matter, what areas technology could impact in GCC, let's just set the context. And this is a slide that we've used in some of our presentations. So this is what we're bombarded with on a daily basis, right? You know, the fact that the iPad, the technology that's available, there is a solution that is out there that can change education and address a number of problems that we have, and different systems have different problems. But this is something we're bombarded with, and when we speak to policymakers, one of the issues that they face is that they are inundated with suppliers, technology providers who say that they can provide a one-stop shop, and that creates a lot of confusion and concern. And there's just a view that, what do we do? And there's a sort of sense of paralysis when we speak to certain policymakers around, where do we go from here? Because there's just so much available out there. But if you compare that to what happened, 10 to 30 years ago, it was no different. It's the same headlines happening, same thing being said. I particularly like the one that came out about the Arizona schools. That says they're going to replace textbooks with computers. Essentially, that hasn't changed. I think everyone has realized that we still work on chalk and talk or smartboard and talk approach. But this is education, especially in schools, has just not changed, even though there's been a lot of talk about it for the last 30 years. But guess what? 100 years ago, someone was saying the exact same thing. Thomas Edison believed that the school system will be completely changed and we will move to the motion picture. So technology at that stage. But I think now is the time where we are seeing some great changes for a number of reasons. And these are reasons that I think we're all aware of. One is the improved infrastructure that we see in terms of the internet users. And I think what we saw with Etisalat in the region, what they've done is they have created probably one of the strongest networks and infrastructure bases for the region and for the UAE. The other area that is driving this change is this increased focus on outcomes. So if you look at some of the countries that are participating, there's over 70 countries now participating in the PISA study in science and mathematics. And the focus really is on delivering those higher educational outcomes. And especially in this region, where some of our colleagues have alluded to, the focus on education is really paramount as they move away from their dependence on minerals and oil. And education is seen as the way to drive that economic growth from other sectors. Perhaps not in some of the markets in the GCC, but definitely in other markets, we see that increased cost pressures is driving this need for technology adoption. And technology could be a way of reducing some of the cost pressures that education systems face. And finally, and as we'll see some more research and data, is that there is this increasing consumer demand. And when I say consumers, I'm not only talking about students, but I'm talking about parents, and I'm talking about teachers. Quite often we've seen and heard that teachers can be a roadblock. Yes, to some extent when they don't understand, as David would have said, if you can't switch it on and like you switch on a light, they do get slightly scared off by the technology. But with our research, what we've discovered with teachers, even in the GCC, is that they are very keen to adopt technology and use it in their classrooms. So I think there is time for a change. But I think one thing that we should all, again, this is a view that I am just sort of repeating, but when we've gone out and spoken to experts and policymakers in this area, some of the quotes that have come back are highlighted on this slide, which is, this is not a hardware-based solution. This is not a magic potion, a silver bullet. It's a platform. It's a tool. It's like a pen. It's not the black box solution that you're going to get. And the phrase that we use is technology-enabled learning, TEL, which we define as the integrated use of technology to support and accelerate student and system performance. So this is not only about student performance, but also about how efficiently a school or a school network can operate and provide data on how well it's doing. And there are some very innovative models in the private sector that we've seen. And again, some of the points around personalization is very important to help learners at different levels achieve their goals as well. So why do we think that the GCC is ready? I mean, what is so important? What's happening in the GCC that means it's ready to adopt and take on technology? I mean, there has been a lot of investment in the region over the last 30 to 40 years in education. We have seen a lot of growth in our business as well based on that, supporting both private sector operators and the public sector. And it's insatiable. The demand is insatiable, and there's a need. And the issue is there are still a number of education challenges that persist, and we'll talk about them shortly, despite significant reform efforts. There's also a willingness, and when you go and talk to people in government, in schools, in public and private schools, there's a real willingness and need to embrace technology, and they feel there's a need for reform, and teachers and students are willing to embrace it as well as parents. And as we look at the different markets in terms of penetration of technology, our perspective is that technology in the GCC is not as highly used and as you would have in some of the more developed markets, such as the US. So let's talk about the need, and this is an interesting piece of data. So a lot of the research that you will see is based on students and teachers from the countries that are listed on the slide below. But this is the point that I was trying to make earlier, which is that there's been a lot of investment and a lot of work gone into changing the education systems and processes in this region. But we still, in terms of some of the key metrics, we still underperform the global average. So in terms of the outcomes, we do need to improve those outcomes, and technology could potentially play a part in this. And then when you talk to teachers, and there are lots of quotes and lots of perspectives that you'll see in our report, but this is just a summary view. And when we ask them, what could improve the way technology is used at your school. There is this demand for technology, and they're asking for technology to be brought into their classrooms. They want it. They want it to be part of what they feel and touch and interact with on a day-to-day basis. They also want better technology. So I don't think it's really about the hardware, but it's about the ease of use, which is what they've been talking to us about. And then there's more time. They want time for the student to spend on the laptop, get more individual training as well. And for them, they see technology as a real tool to improve not only retention of students, but also engagement of students. When you talk to students, we talk to students who just graduated, and their view is, again, we said, what could we do to improve the way technology is used? And their whole belief is, again, it wasn't really about the hardware. No one is complaining about the hardware in the GCC. In fact, that's one of the things I think they've gotten right. But people wanted more time. They just wanted more time with the technology. They wanted better engagement with the technology. And these are the things that we need to think about as we think about putting in the technology-enabled systems. And I think, again, just to reiterate, it's really not about the hardware so much, but it's more about the training, the level of engagement, and the time that you provide to students and teachers to interface with that technology. And then we asked teachers, do you think that you can improve student learning through technology? And 100% of them said yes. And when you break down the reasons for that, and it's amazing that's 100%, but they really do believe it. And this is across all the GCC countries that were shown on one of the earlier slides. One is around student employability. How can we provide more information to them around careers, on guidance, on English, actually. And English is an important tool for employability in this region. And as we'll see in some of the later data, it's one of the issues that graduate students have just struggled with. Also, it does help with student motivation. Just having technology in the classroom they have found, teachers who have used it, has helped with student motivation. It's not really so much about the outcomes in terms of grades. I think that's still unproven, and teachers recognize that. But they definitely believe that there are certain skills, some of the 21st century skills that are important for employability that can be imparted through technology, as well as engaging and motivating students. So this is the perspective really from the guys on the ground in the region. Our view, again, based on this research, is that for K-12, and we're not talking about higher education here, is there are 4 main areas that technology can really make an impact on. And those are pedagogy. And again, these are areas that everyone has talked about today. Pedagogy, the curriculum standards and assessment, teacher quality, and parental involvement. And I'm going to share some data with you on each of these areas. So when we went out and surveyed teachers, when we looked at the amount of time teachers are spending teaching, what's interesting and surprising is actually in the GCC, they spend more time than markets such as Korea and Japan. There's a lot more administration and remedial work that is being done by teachers in South Korea and Japan, but core teaching hours is higher in the GCC countries. So, is there scope for them to spend more time preparing and grading assignments, and reduce the actual hours of teaching, and use some of those innovative techniques that we've seen in Wolverhampton and in Flip the Classroom to actually improve quality outcomes? Because despite the greater number of teaching hours, if you remember, the outcomes in terms of the TIM scores are lower. And then when you talk to students, and we've done surveys with employers as well in the region, and employers, the feedback that we get is when students come out of school, and higher education institutes as well, so when students come out of school, the 2 areas that they are really short in is, one is English skills, and then just some of the basic technical skills of learning, and some of the 21st century skills of working together as a team, project-based work. And I think this is where some of this data is from students, and what they're saying is English communication is a very big issue for them, and perhaps technology can help in that area. But also, again, mirroring that point around career guidance, finding a job, trying to understand what is the right career for them. So where can technology play a role in this? And this is just feedback straight from the students. And if we talk about teacher quality, and again, we've talked so much about teacher training and human capital development today. We went out to survey teachers, and we asked them, how many times per year do you receive professional development? And 60% of them said that they've never received professional development. About 35, 40% of them had it once to twice a year. So again, our firm belief is that with technology, one of the main opportunities for technology to have a real impact in the GCC, on our schools, is using it to train our teachers and finding the right solution to do that. And there are a lot of solutions out there. The question is, how do we find the right one? And on my final slide, I'll talk to you a little bit about how we would approach the question of what's the right product and system for me to employ to address some of these issues. And the final one is, of course, one that we've talked about again, which is parental involvement. And whilst I hear, there is a growing involvement in terms of what parents are doing with their education for their kids, one of the surveys that we recently did, that 70% of teachers still felt that parents were not supporting their children, and they felt that the minute the kids came out of the school gate, that's where the learning stopped, and parents weren't getting involved. And I think some of the techniques that have been described here today, in terms of use of the videos, the engagement with parents, could help. And again, technology has a part to play with that. And I think parents do want to get involved, but they don't know how. So one of the practical things that technology can do is help parents understand how they can interact with the education of their children. So again, the report will amplify these issues and talk about them in great detail, but I think some of these points have already been raised, but there is scope for technology to impact personalization for pupils, so students operating at different levels of competency and capability can use technology if they're struggling or if they're going further ahead to learn more. Definitely one area is around human capital and how you can do that. Using your resources better, so in terms of teacher time, how can you do that? And parental engagement, and then training the future generation to become digital citizens. And again, we'll go into what that means in terms of the report, but essentially, we don't want to create a generation of folk who are just very good at looking at social media, but as one of my colleagues pointed out, learn to learn through technology rather than just use it as a source of entertainment. And as we go through a process with a ministry or a school system in terms of implementing how they should think about technology and the use of technology in their system, this is the high-level, four-step approach, which is really you have to understand the system and the needs of that system currently. So I think some of my colleagues have talked about avoiding that cookie-cutter approach, and I think some of the international firms who come in with their solutions don't appreciate wholly some of the challenges that different systems face. And the systems and the issues that you face in Qatar are very different from the issues that you would face in Saudi Arabia or the UAE. And understanding those specific issues is very, very important. So spending time to understand the current situation and the current issues and talking to all the stakeholders is a very important part of trying to put in technology into the system. And then the system-wide goals, and I think one of the things that the GCC governments have been very good at doing is creating a very clear set of goals in terms of what they want to do through their vision documents and through their education strategies. But aligning the technology solutions that you recommend with those goals is absolutely vital. There is no point ignoring those, because essentially those goals for education are driven by the goals for the economy. And as someone had earlier said, the linkage is just very clear, that there has to be an involvement of the private sector and the economy with education. And then the third point is really around implementation. And I think implementation, whenever we've worked on change projects in the region, the most successful ones have started off with small pilots and built up over time, and then done a mass rollout. And the pilot, of course, is a great opportunity for you to learn and refine some of the recommendations that you make. And then, of course, the final point is really around going for scale. If you just are satisfied with the pilot and go for, maybe one district or one area, then I would say that any change effort involving technology has not been successful, because what we would want to do is impact as many teachers, as many students, and as many parents as possible with technology. And the goal of any technology-based change management program should be on achieving scale. So those are some of our perspectives. And we are a team of around 250 people across the globe, across our 5 offices. And if you would like to learn a little bit more about Pathenon and some of our research that we're doing in this area, but also in other areas of education, please log on to our website, to our LinkedIn page, to our Facebook page, and we'd be happy to help you with understanding some of the issues that you're facing. So with that, I could open it up to questions, or I could, as a good chairman, allow you all to move to lunch and stay on course, and I'll be available outside for questions.